Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Today's Elko Live here on KELK features our guest in studio from one of the most important nonprofit organizations in the community, and that's Committee Against Domestic Violence. For decades now, they have been serving our community. The mission of CADV is to provide violence prevention, community education, and direct and confidential services to victims and non-offending family members. So it brings me great pleasure to welcome in studio today the Executive Director of this organization, and that's Deana Utt, and she's accompanied by the Systems Advocate employed by Elko Police Department, and that is Amber Huff. And it's wonderful to see both of you ladies. Hi, Deana. Start with you.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And Amber, welcome to the studio.
Thanks.
Yep, it's great to see both of you here. We're going to talk about some very important events coming up, of which the community is invited to participate with both CADV and other agencies within our community in observing a time to stand by victim survivors of domestic violence, abuse, sexual violence. And so we'll talk more about that with today's guest. But well, first of all, I think, Deana, we'll start with you and talk about your many years, in fact, and the various roles you've had with CADV. You started as an advocate there or as a volunteer, is that right?
I did. I actually worked for juvenile probation, and we started doing community service projects there, and that's how I became, familiar with the organization. And there was an opening, and I became a victim advocate there, and eventually became director.
And so this isn't a job for the faint of heart, is it? It's really for someone, same kind of work that Amber does, who's passionate and caring and involved?
Yes, absolutely. And our agency is a little bit different. We do respond to scenes with law enforcement. So we're right there with them and encounter the victim as it's fresh and
as the situation is unfolding. It could be midnight, it could be 4 o'clock in the morning, or any time of the day.
Yes, we're on call 24/7. We have a 24/7 hotline that anyone, law enforcement can call us, victims can call us, healthcare providers can call us.
And that is the way that we have operated in the community now for at least 20 years. Oh, and full disclosure, I do want listeners to know I sit on the board of directors for CADV, and I think it's one of the most important things that I've done in the community, and I'm very passionate and committed to this organization, Deana. I have incredible respect for you and your small staff.
Yes, we are a staff of 4.
Huge hearts, but a small number of people. I need to be clear on that, so thank you. So the crisis line that Deana mentioned is 775-738-9454.
Yes.
I'll put that out at the beginning of the program. We'll repeat it again because it could be a lifeline for people. CADV is serving not only Elko, but surrounding counties?
Yes, we cover 3 counties, Elko, as you mentioned, White Pine, and Eureka.
And you have someone very special to the organization sitting beside you today. I was hoping you might say a couple of things about Amber so that we can get to meet her today.
Yeah, so Amber's a systems-based advocate for the Elko Police Department, and she is amazing. We work so well together, and we are just so happy to have this community partnership.
Welcome, Amber. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind telling us what brings you to the organization, what was your passion behind this?
Well, I've been in criminal justice since 2004, basically. My undergraduate degree was in CJ, and then I moved to Ohio to get graduate degrees in justice administration, and I was pursuing a PhD in criminology and corrections. And I did research in corrections for, a number of years. I don't know, 8 years or something like that. And then decided to move back to Nevada and chose Elko. We wanted a small rural town with a lot of stuff to do outside, and there happened to be this grant that the police department was pursuing for a systems-based advocate to be working side by side with the community as well as officers to help get the victims entirely through the system, and that's kind of my job, is to guide them through the system, whatever that looks like for them. And so I applied for the position, and I've been doing it for almost it'll be 5 years at the end of this year, yeah.
Oh, Amber, thank you so much. We're going to talk more about what that's like to be that advocate for victims. But I did want to mention that this was an important decision for our police department. In fact, our board of directors has Lieutenant Pepper on the board of directors with the Elko Police Department, and Elko County Under Sheriff Justin Ames.
Yes.
So it's an important relationship that we have in the community because CADV supports law enforcement supports victims. I mean, it's really a circle, right, Deana?
It really is.
And so, Amber, if you wouldn't mind just describing, because you can be arriving on a scene or helping a victim at one of the most crucial, impactful times of their lives, right? And there are often children involved and families.
Right. And most of the time, I'm not going to the scene. Deana will be doing that. I often try to follow up directly with the victims right afterwards and get them any assistance that they need. And sometimes that is shelter. And if Deana's not already involved or one of her advocates, I will make that warm handoff to make sure that they have someplace safe to stay. But if their abuser has been arrested, and they're looking to pursue like a protection order or something like that, then I can help walk them through that process, help get that in place for them, help get it served, work with the officers to make sure that they're safe, because that's a number one priority. Not everybody wants that, but some people do. And then from there, explaining how the system works, because oftentimes they don't know what comes next. They're like, all right, this thing just happened, and now they're in jail, and I have kids, and I have to go to work, and all of these different things, and my life is just kind of imploded a little bit. So what do I do next? And we can sit down and make a plan for them. We can work with Deana. We can work with other agencies that might be able to provide assistance for them, but then also letting them know this is what happens. The officer writes a report, and they'll make suggested charges that then, if it's a domestic violence charge, they'll go to the DA's office, and then from there, they'll decide whether or not to pursue those charges. So it's not the victim themselves, pressing charges against that person. It's the DA's office.
In fact, there are laws to ensure that, right?
There are. Mm-hmm. So that's where assault and domestic violence really differ. And understanding that, and in fact, I was explaining that to somebody today, because they were like, well, what happens next? And they specifically asked, am I the one that's pressing charges? And I said, no. I said, the officer wrote his report, it goes to the DA's office, and from there, they decide. And sometimes they might say, there's not enough here, based on the report that we're seeing, we're not going to pursue any charges, and then nothing happens.
All right.
But sometimes they say yes.
And even if nothing happens, that's still sort of an entry into this process of which we can help victims, right, Deana? Because not every arrest ends with this prosecution, right?
Right.
But the goal is to strengthen families and to empower people to make decisions so that they can live healthy lives.
Yes, absolutely. And even if law enforcement doesn't get involved, that's okay. We can still help you. You don't have to involve law enforcement if you choose not to.
That's really an important distinction. Let's talk about Harbor House. That's a 24-hour shelter. So that's something very unique for rural communities. We've had a lot of community support over the years to build this facility and now to operate it.
Yes. Yes.
So if someone needs shelter, I think it's okay to mention you're almost overflowing today. You have a lot of people that need shelter.
We're a little up there in capacity, but we still have room, and we still have other options if people need shelter and we may not have availability with us. We still have other resources to help them, stay safe.
And that's the important thing, is that you will find help, but it's also about raising this awareness about this type of violence that's happening in our community. We've seen increases, say, in arrest of people for suspected domestic violence. Deana, would you say that you're seeing more cases or more severe cases of domestic violence?
I would say we're seeing more severe cases. A lot of strangulation, I've noticed.
And that is important to talk about because strangulation, there is an enhancement for domestic violence. And I believe the bail on that is something like $250,000. It's very serious. It's almost an attempted murder. Amber's nodding. She knows about this. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. There is an enhancement for strangulation that does increase bail, and also it just makes things a lot more serious. And I don't know if people really understand, including the victims, if they've been strangled, they really need to go get checked out because you can die up to 5 days later from being strangled. So, it can be severe enough internally, and oftentimes there are not any bruises because we expect to see bruising, and when we don't, it's also difficult to convict. But we expect to see bruising, and there's only like 20% of cases, I think, that you will see bruising.
Well, we all know as a community what that felt like to go through the death of Stephanie Gonzalez, and who was strangled. And so, again, these are important conversations to have in the community. And thank you, Amber, for reminding us that there may not always be physical signs of violence or abuse. In fact, Deana, I'm sure you help a lot of clients to deal with the emotional aspects of ongoing abuse.
Yes. We, like I said, even if, emotional abuse is not necessarily, something that can be prosecuted. Financially, social isolation, those are all types of domestic violence, and those are things that we can help victims through and support.
It's a form of power and control, right?
Yes, that's basically what domestic violence is power and control.
So we do want to mention, and we are going to talk about Denim Day because that's a chance for the community to come out and stand with survivors and show support. We'll talk about that. That'll be next week, but we'll obviously spend some time. But Deana, let's focus on breaking the cycle, right? Because we know you have numerous partners and collaborators in the community, the Heart and Hope through the UNR extension. That's helping families get beyond. It's not just that initial phone call, we're in crisis, we need shelter, but there's follow through and follow up.
Yes, which is huge. You have, the initial incident, but then, like Amber stated, that's what victim advocates do. We help guide you from start to finish. We take you from victim to survivor.
And there are several ways to do that in the community. There are some needs, obviously, childcare, workforce training. Are these some options for people that you can help connect them to?
Yes, Head Start actually is partnered with us and does, work with our clients. Local thrift stores for baby job interview clothes, work with clients, and give them free clothing and things like that.
To help them make that transition. And Deana and Amber, I'll talk to you both about this because some people listening might not understand why doesn't a victim of domestic violence just leave, right? They're both saying, yep. And do you want to talk about that first, Amber?
From what we see, it takes up to 7 times for someone to leave if they ever decide to leave. And when you're looking at a relationship, especially when we enter the picture, it's really bad at that moment. But then there's the rest of the time that they're with this person, and the relationship isn't always bad. They have all of these really good moments together, and that's part of that cycle as well. The honeymoon phase where the person is love bombing them and they're the most important person, and they create this really strong bond, and then they break them down, and then it starts over. They say, I'm so sorry, and they create another strong bond, and then it just keeps going over and over again. So the relationship isn't always bad all the time. For some people it is, but for most people that we're working with, it isn't. And then Elko is a really unique community in that a lot of the people that live here are not from here. They probably don't have family here. Oftentimes there's not a lot of strong bonds with friends if you didn't grow up here. And then if you have children, that also keeps you tied here. And it's really easy for a family to move in, completely isolate one person, because it's not always the male that's the abuser. One person is isolated, and then they're tied to this spot because they have children, and they can't go back home, wherever that might be. Financially as well, we see primarily males. They'll work at the mine or whatever, and you have someone staying home with the kids, they can't just pick up and leave because they don't have the money to do that. And then also they can't generally just take the kids and go. There could be legal repercussions for doing something like that. It's really actually difficult. Elko's also incredibly expensive. And to just get an apartment when you don't have the financial means or are not working, it takes a lot of planning, and that's something that we can help with. And that's something that we have seen people succeed at doing. It gets a lot harder before it gets easier. And so oftentimes people choose to stay because that's the easier option.
Talking with Amber Huff, and she's a systems advocate for the Elko Police Department alongside Deana Utt, who's Executive Director of Committee Against Domestic Violence. Amber said something important, Deana, again about children, the impact on children. It might be easier to stay, someone might want to leave, but what happens to children in the instance if you do stay in this relationship? Or can happen, I guess we should say, right?
Yes. Obviously, even though the abuse may just be focused on the adult member and not the children, but they still see that. They're still traumatized by that. They experience, the emotional, the mental abuse as well.
Does it become a cycle? We hear that.
It can be.
Yeah. So some children might grow up
seeing that and then
think it's normal.
And they either become victims themselves into adulthood, or they may even become the abuser.
Which that is really the sad tragedy too. And so there are things that we can do. We need to change the culture. We need to change the discussion, right? I mean, I think that's probably a good place to start. Do you think, Amber? More people talking about domestic violence and the impacts on the community?
I think so. It used to be a very closed door, like what happens behind closed doors stays that way, and we don't discuss it. And now there's been a lot more open advocacy and options for people, and I think that is one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in cases and an increase in people coming forward. They know that there's a help, and they can see a way out.
We've seen that too in our discussions about the Child Advocacy Center, which we do know is one of the many partners of CADV. They're investigating as many as 20 reports a month of child sexual assault, not just from Elko, but surrounding rural communities. And sometimes there can be this type of violence that is perpetuated in families and extends to children in various ways, right, Deana?
Yes, unfortunately.
So this is another thing that we need to talk about too, which is, dating or stalking relationships, sextortion, threats. Some of this can be built into a domestic violence situation. Do you think that's fair to say, Amber? I mean, have you seen that in your...
We have definitely seen that. So just because you're married doesn't mean that you cannot be raped so we do see marital rape often.
Yes.
Actually really often, and more times than not, it's not reported. And they'll tell us. So we might see this one physical thing that's happened. The officers were called, there's a report, and they'll say, oh yeah, also all of these other times, but they don't want to report it. And it is really difficult to charge here. But we also see it with past relationships too. One person will go and, rape another person that they used to be with, and then if it's reported, they'll just say, well, we just had consensual sex, so we used to date and then we hooked up, like it's not a big deal. It's very, very underreported.
It is a very big deal too. It's very damaging.
A very big deal, and it's harder to come forward with something like that to begin with, and then the charges, everything about sexual assault is just so much more difficult. We still encourage people to come forward, but
it doesn't always. I mean, we know, we're aware of a case in Elko, a jury trial, and that's why I thought it was important we have to talk about this. We have to change the culture and the discussion, because there was a trial in which there was some video evidence of a woman being unconscious. and she was sexually assaulted. All the evidence was there, but the jury still found that the perpetrator was not guilty. He was acquitted because there was evidence that they had had a previous relationship or some flirtation or something that the jury perceived led up to this assault. And we're speechless. We're speechless sitting here talking about
and
this.
Yes.
I think that people need to understand, like, you can give consent, but that consent can be taken away at any moment.
Absolutely.
And so, and there have been cases where, somebody consents to one thing, but they don't want to do this other thing. And that's when it becomes rape. But juries are difficult to convince, especially if it was consensual in the beginning, or there were flirtations, or they were on a date, or, they're married.
And oftentimes we do see victims of domestic violence, and who, when we further start, diving into things and discussing things, we explain to them that was marital rape. Just because you're married, you don't have to consent to sex.
And it's important, too, for people listening. We know there are a lot of social media networks, and people have discussions all the time. But there may be people in our community who are serial rapists, who are committing these types of offenses, and unbeknownst to the victims, they're connected. So you may feel like your isolated incident doesn't amount to an arrest or prosecution, but the culmination of those reports coming forward in a confidential way, right, Amber and Deana, could make the difference and stop that person from perpetuating these assaults on women or even children.
And oftentimes we do get reports, and we know some of those people, and we try to keep an eye on them, or the officers do. But it's getting a really good case against that person before those charges can be really brought forward.
So again, the important thing to keep in mind is that families, talk to your children, make sure that they understand that their bodies are their own, and then teenagers also need to be very aware.
Yes, teen dating violence
is huge, right?
Huge.
Okay. Consent, consent, consent. And no means no.
Yes.
At any point.
At any point.
Right. So whether it's an incidence of stalking or sextortion, or you feel threatened, you're trying to exit a relationship, or as Amber mentioned, an ex just won't leave you alone. These are all reasons to maybe have a confidential conversation with someone at CADV or the systems advocate, would you say? Okay. Mm-hmm. And what's the best way, if someone is not in an emergency, Deana, should they reach out for help, maybe in our community?
So they can call our office line at 775-738-6524.
Okay. And that is the office line. And again, you can just get some confidential information, right? Or ask to speak to an advocate?
Or ask to speak to an advocate. Anyone who answers the phone is an advocate at our facility. So, and the emergency crisis line, sometimes people might not be able to call because their abuser may be in the room. They can text us.
Oh, that line. Same line. Okay. 775-738-9454, and you can text.
Yes.
Okay. But the important thing is that CADV is offering this ongoing support, right? And Amber, you're helping usher this process, because it can be so intimidating. If you have police officers at your house, you're worried about what neighbors think. A lot of times a victim is pressured into not pursuing charges, right?
Yes. So that's a conversation I have often, is they're wanting to drop the charges. And then I have to explain to them how the system works. And sometimes they change their mind and, they don't want to be cooperative. But other times they do. And part of the process for both of us, Deana and I, we will go to court with the victim. And we sit there with them, and, we can't say anything. But just being able to sit there with them and explain to them, okay, this is what that word meant, because oftentimes you'll be in court and it's really confusing. You might not have ever experienced that process before. The judges and the attorneys might be throwing lingo back and forth, and we can help to let you describe what that means exactly. And so that's part of the services that we offer, is just going to court with them every single time, whether it's for TPO or they're testifying on the stand.
And I'm glad you mentioned services, because all of this that we're talking about is free.
It's free.
It's free.
Yep. It's free. It's confidential. It's 24 hours if need be.
Absolutely.
So come to your home, or if you need to flee, because that's the other thing. Sometimes people will simply pack up the car and head out.
And head out. Absolutely. And even if maybe they aren't ready to leave right now, or they're not in a position, we can create a safety plan to help you leave when you are ready. That's something we also do.
Oh, that's really important to know, a safety plan. So maybe you're listening and you're helping somebody. You're worried about a neighbor or a family member, because as Amber mentioned, people move here with various industries, and then you become isolated. You're away from your family, your normal support system. So, and when part of that power and control is if the person that's the abuser also holds all the family resources, the vehicles, the bank accounts,
The birth certificates,
Yeah.
the IDs.
And this is one thing that I often tell victims when I'm working with them, is anything that you hold dear. It could be coins, a coin collection, I know, an address book, very important documents. Either make copies of all of those things or give them to somebody for safekeeping, because there are so many times that I've seen those things disappear, and oftentimes it's, say, not criminal, right? Especially if you're married, or they just do it because they know that thing was special to you.
and that brings. Oh, go ahead, Amber.
Oh no.
But that is a way to control someone.
Yes.
Right, through material possessions. Another big one is pets, right, Deana? I know that's something we've been working on. Yeah.
Yes, because, that's another form of control, is the pet. And victims do know that, if they leave, the abusers often said, well, I'll hurt the dog, I'll hurt the cat. And so a lot of times I've talked to many victims who say, I'm not going to leave without my pets.
And as a community, we're working on that, right? So that we can take pets with us.
That's something we are trying for, yes.
Yes, it's really important. So don't be discouraged. Know that if a pet is an important part of your life, somebody within this advocacy group will help you to get your pet to safety, to reunite you with your pet, to make it possible that the whole family can escape the cycle of violence. Because it's not good for pets either.
No.
It's absolutely not good for, no. So we've talked about a lot of really heavy things today. I did want to mention one more thing, which takes us to this second part of the cycle, or third or fourth, but this is the lethality assessment, and this is a new tool. And Amber, I know you're really familiar with that, right? And Deana, this is something that whether or not a victim recognizes it, you could be in fear for your life. You could lose your life as a result of domestic violence. So there's a tool, a procedure that officers use, right, Amber?
Yes, it's called the danger assessment, and the one that the officers use is for law enforcement. It's 11 questions that really get into the last year of the relationship, whether or not you've left, whether they've used a weapon against you, if you've been strangled multiple times, and other questions. Each one of those really gets to your risk of being murdered, basically, by your partner. And these are questions based on people who have been murdered. Like, what did the last year of their relationship look like, and what kind of led up to this? And so the higher that score is, the more at risk you are. And we have seen quite a few high-risk people here. And so we have a plan in place when the officers do that Dale assessment. If it's 7 or higher, then they are triggered to call CADV. They go to the scene and help the victim in whatever way that they need.
Talk them through the process, because some people may simply be at the end of the rope, right, Deana? They feel helpless and hopeless.
Yes, and then that's where we come in and we let them know we are here. We are to support you any way that you need us to support you. We don't tell them what they should do. We give them options and choices, and we let them choose. We give them back the control.
Okay. So again, important calls to make before the relationship obviously turns to that form of violence, that lethal violence, until you, and it's just happened too many times in our community. I'm sure that almost anybody listening is well aware of a family that's been impacted by this violence, whether or not you knew them personally, but we are aware of it in our community. We are at risk for this, as both Amber and Deana have been talking about today. So we want to mention Denim Day. That is an opportunity to stand with victims and survivors of sexual violence. And next Wednesday, the 24th, at the Elko Police Department training room, Deana, we do know that Denim Day is important to domestic violence advocates and organizations, right? You want to tell us about that?
Yes, so it actually started back in 1992 in Italy. An 18-year-old girl was raped by her 45-year-old driving instructor. It was her first driving lesson. He took her out on an isolated road, pulled her out of the car, pulled off her jeans, forcefully raped her. She did turn him in. There was a court process, and he was convicted. About 7 years later, he appealed the sentence, claiming they had consensual sex. Her jeans were so tight, there's no way he could have gotten them off by himself. And unfortunately, it was overturned and he was released.
And so that serves as this example that by 1999, the Supreme Court, right, overruled that conviction, again, implying that this victim basically was asking for it by wearing the tight pants. And that's the culture that we have to overcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so ever since then, the Peace Over Violence organization developed Denim Day, and it's nationally and internationally recognized. Currently, 20 states participate in that, and on that day, you know, business women, community members, just basically elected officials, anyone.
Men and women.
Men and women.
Wear your jeans.
Wear your jeans.
Wear them however you like to wear your jeans. It's Denim Day. And so we'll get together at the police station next Wednesday between 11 and 1. There'll be a press conference, some networking opportunities, and there's a local person, Nora Lusk, who will be honored with something called the 2024 Visionary Voice Award for the work that she's done in advocating for victims, survivors of sexual violence. So that's the opportunity, right?
Yes.
Well, in the meantime, I guess in closing to today, I want to make sure that people know that CADV is not just immediately responding to victims, but you're also working on some long-term needs, right, Deana? Things like transitional housing.
Transitional housing, additional housing for our shelter it's crucial. We need it.
Expanding that shelter.
Absolutely. We have emergency shelter. We have a limited number of space, but we need to be able to have a safe space for victims to rebuild their life and know that they're going to be safe, they're going to be financially secure, and they can still, you know, stay with us and have that security for a while until they're able to get on their feet. And like she said, this town is very unique. It's very expensive, and that's hard to do.
We need an encouraging atmosphere, right, Amber? Because the fact is you're taking someone out of their home, even though it may be a terrible environment right now. It's what they know. And to encourage them to do something different is hard.
It really is, especially when they go into shelter, they know they have a limited amount of time. And so if CADV is able to get transitional housing, they'll have more time. Because even if it's 3 months, that's not really long enough to get your life in order and get on the housing waiting list, which is over a year, and get established and your routines and all of that stuff, and then to have to move out of that again. And oftentimes that's when they go back.
Doing that with children.
And with children.
Whether it's one child or several children, you're responsible, and that multiplies in how complicated it is. But you've helped families, I'm sure, of all sizes, Deana.
We have, and we want to continue to help families. We just need some help in doing that.
Okay. So the best way to help CADV is?
Funding. Anyone has a house they want to donate, that'd be great.
Well, that's not such a bad idea, because obviously that transitional housing would be used to support families as they, again, work to become independent with workforce development, whether it's in education or some vocational training. Certainly landing on their feet again in a safe, secure environment, building their confidence, right, Amber? Because especially if you're a parent, soon to be a single parent.
And that's another partner that we have is Heart and Hope. And so that's kind of where they come in. And we both refer to Heart and Hope. And that's a program through UNR Extension here in town. They have usually a session in the spring and then another one in the summer. So I think their session is ongoing right now. But it helps parents or guardians of kids who've been in a house with domestic violence rebuild that relationship. And so that helps to break the cycle.
Thank you so much. And the best way to find out about this is to call your office, right, Deana? Call the business line, right?
Call the business line.
Okay. And I'm going to give that number again. I have the crisis line in front of me, so tell me again what the, yes.
That number is 775-738-6524.
Perfect. I've got that right here. So call the office line, 775-738-6524. You can assist CADV. You can donate money, food, clothing, hygiene items, household items. Volunteer opportunities include the crisis line, office help, maintenance help, serving on the board of directors, fundraising. Community members can also adopt families for holidays or for an entire year, because even the smallest financial contribution make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Okay. And keep watching and listening for CADV fundraisers throughout the year, because we'll be talking more about expanding the shelter. Thank you, Deana.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you both for being on the program. Thank you, Amber, so much. And thank you for the work you do. Gosh, yeah.
She's amazing.
She is amazing. I can tell. What a calming, caring presence, what any victim would hope to find when they're in this crisis in their life. So thank you. Yeah. We're all just staring at each other going, wow, what a tough topic today. Thank you, listeners, for joining us for Elko Live today. Please do support Committee Against Domestic Violence in our community, and talk with your family, talk with your friends, talk with your coworkers, and normalize these conversations. We must change the culture, and we must increase the awareness about this occurrence in our community. It's for all of us to have a healthier place to live. Thank you, listeners, for joining us for Elko Live today.